All right, audience, you can introduce yourself to my professor.
But that's really dumb.
All right. Well, as you guys know, my name is Joshua Keller. It is a privilege to be sharing with you guys today. To start off, how many of you guys ever had siblings when you were growing up? Well, okay, 2. So maybe you guys have experienced this really annoying sensation that comes from when you're young and your mom gives you your marching orders. You have this task you're supposed to do, and you're going to do it, and you go to get your sibling, and you say the exact words your mom said, and they don't do anything. They question you. They keep doing what they want. But then when your mom comes and says the exact same thing, how frustrating it is because they listen without question. It's an interesting thing that truth. It's an interesting thing to see that people respond differently from truth coming from different sources. Our current culture only listens to expertise and experience in when they are evaluating truth. And becoming an astronaut could give you the platform you're looking for to really have a strong witness in our culture today and in our modern culture because of this fact. And I have acquired an understanding of this topic because I have spent some time with my imagination and thorough research of credible sources to have a pretty good grasp of this topic. And if you're interested in an exciting job where you can be in a scientific field and yet have a huge, incredible platform for preaching the gospel, then you should really consider becoming an astronaut. And that's just what I want to propose to you guys today, that you can have a huge platform by becoming an astronaut and preaching the gospel. And just a little preview for you guys, you can just fasten your seatbelts because I'm going to be showing you on how living a life as an astronaut, being a gospel teacher and preacher, will give you, will be living out something that God values. And yeah, I'll just get into it. My first point is that our American culture looks to experience and expertise to decide authority. And this is something that's just human nature, that we would filter our information, filter truth through where the source of truth is coming from. Like, for example, if your neighbor comes up and knocks on your door and says, you need to pack up all your stuff, board up your windows, there's a hurricane coming, it's going to be terrible, you need to hurry up and get out of here. You'd be like, I don't really know if you're telling the truth, but like the police come and knock on your door and say the exact same thing, then you're probably going to respond a little bit differently. In the same way, we can see our culture obsessed with authoritative and experience for evaluating truth. We have highly educated doctors, and then expert doctors, and then expertise inside those expert sections of health. And that is just where we get truth from. And since we have looked at in our culture today how we evaluate truth through authority and through expertise, let us look at how in the scientific field we use them, how that affects our belief system. The scientific field, and that brings us to point number 2. Modern culture looks to science to filter through this religious debate that's going on, because of the view that scientists are elite thinkers. In a column by USA Today called "Science and Religion Aren't Friends," the writer Jerry Cohn writes, and he basically says that science and faith are at war, and science is winning. His assumptions are weak and filled with bitterness. I feel like this is a very bitter article, but he makes a valid point. He speaks for our culture, is that science is going to filter through our religious debate, and when science answers these questions, it's not going to choose religion. It's going to choose science. Like, that's going to be the answer, and that's kind of like what he speaks for. And another study that was done by Pew, which is a pretty respectable, credible statistic company that runs statistics, and they did a study, and they found 50% of scientists, people in the scientific field, believe in God or a higher power, and 16% of all scientists, they are evangelical Christians. And there's this misconception in our world today that there is no room for believers in science, and this is not even true. It's a misconception, like I just said. There's not only room, there's a need for Bible-believing, gospel-preaching scientists and people in the scientific field. And now that we have just looked through that, let's go to let's look at our main point number 3, where we see a specific field of science being something that God values. And that would be the scientific field of being an astronaut is a life that has the opportunity to live things that God values. One thing that God values is that His saving truth. God desires people coming to the saving truth that He offers. 1 Timothy 2:3-4 says this: "This is a good and acceptable in the sight of God our Savior, who desires all men to be saved and come to the knowledge of the truth." That's one thing that God values, is people coming to the knowledge of His truth, becoming saved through that. And another thing God values is that His children take His message to the world. That message that saves people, He desires that they take that message to the world. And we see that in examples like Matthew 28:18-20, and Acts 1:8, and then again in Romans 10:14-15. Those are just a few. The Bible is filled with these examples. And astronauts are elite in many fields, not just scientific fields, that they're top physical condition, that they're in the elite of all these different fields. And at the same time, they're in the center of the scientific community. So these two things combined allow for a massive platform for preaching the gospel. And with that in mind, let me just recap all the things I've just said. God values His gospel going out. And like I just said, being an astronaut kind of sums up that and allows us to have that kind of a thing happening, a big platform for that to happen on. Because, like I said earlier, that our culture looks to expertise for authority, and science is at the middle of the religious debate. So being an astronaut, having these two things on one platform would really create an incredible place to preach the gospel, which is something that God values. So I think you can see that pretty clearly. And if you're interested in living an exciting life and traveling to outer space and yet having an incredible platform to preach the gospel, you should consider becoming an astronaut.